The rain had already begun to fall by the time I stepped outside, fat drops tapping against the pavement in an uneven rhythm. I pulled my hood over my head and hurried to my car, the humid air thick with the scent of wet earth. The afternoon at Jason's house had been an escape, a few carefree hours lost in video games and easy conversation. But now, the weight of reality settled back onto my shoulders as I drove home. The storm had intensified by the time I reached the driveway. Water streaked down the windows of the darkened house, the only light coming from a dim glow filtering through the curtains. I wasn't expecting anyone to be home. My mother had mentioned she'd be out late, and my father, as usual, was away for work. But the house wasn't silent. A low hum of music floated through the air, blending with something else, something richer than the usual scent of fresh laundry or leftover coffee. It was heavier, unfamiliar. My stomach tightened. Then a sound. A soft murmur of voices, muffled but unmistakable. My mother's laughter, warm and light, intertwined with a deeper voice that I didn't recognize. I moved without thinking, my steps careful, the tension in my chest growing tighter with each passing second. The air itself felt different here, warmer, charged in a way I didn't quite understand. Then, just outside her door, I hesitated. The space beyond was not empty. There was movement. The faint rustle of sheets, the quiet sigh of something I didn't want to name. The room held an intimacy that didn't belong, a softness in the atmosphere that I had only ever known between my parents. A shadow shifted against the lamplight, two figures drawn close in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. The stranger's arm draped lazily over her waist, his fingers tracing slow circles against bare skin. The curve of my mother's body softened into him, her expression, one I had never seen before, bathed in quiet ease. I felt sick. It wasn't just the moment in front of me, it was everything it implied. The stolen time, the whispered conversations, the way I had overlooked the details that now clicked into place with perfect, awful clarity. My father's frequent absences, my mother's sudden shifts in mood, the late nights spent out, the way she had started humming to herself in the mornings as if carrying a secret. The weight of betrayal settled deep in my chest. I wasn't supposed to see this, but there was no one seeing it now. The rain pounded harder against the roof, drowning out the sound of my own breath. And as the storm raged outside, I realized the real tempest was inside me, unraveling everything I thought I knew. My mother had always been steady, predictable. She was the kind of person who hummed softly to herself while cooking, who folded the laundry with care, who kissed my forehead absent-mindedly as she passed by. She was warmth and order, the quiet presence that held our home together. And yet here she was, wrapped in the arms of a man who wasn't my father, tangled in the sheets of a life I hadn't known she was living. Something inside me cracked. I took a step back, my breath shallow, my pulse pounding in my ears. The floor felt unsteady beneath me, the air too thick, too charged. I needed to get out, to escape the suffocating press of this moment before it swallowed me whole. As I turned, the floorboard beneath my foot creaked. The sound was small, barely more than a whisper against the storm outside, but it was enough. Inside the room, the movement stilled. The air shifted, as if the world itself had paused in anticipation. And then, from behind the door, my mother's breath caught, a sharp, sudden intake, like the shattering of glass. She knew. She knew I was there. And in that instant, everything changed. The house had never felt so suffocating. The walls, the air, the very foundation beneath my feet seemed to close in, pressing against my ribs like a vice. I could hear nothing but my own pulse, a steady, unrelenting drum in my ears. Inside the room, silence had taken hold, a silence so absolute it felt like a living thing, thick and consuming, the kind of silence that only comes when someone is caught, when there is nothing left to say, no excuse that could undo what had already been seen. I turned before I could hear her voice, before I could see the panic settle into her eyes. The hallway stretched before me, dark and endless, but I moved through it blindly, my steps quick, unsteady. My breath felt trapped in my chest, tight and shallow, as if my own body was rejecting what it had just witnessed. The moment replayed itself over and over in my mind. The warmth between them, the careless ease of their stolen intimacy. I could still see the shape of them tangled in the sheets, could still feel the weight of my mother's betrayal pressing against me like a hand on my throat. It wasn't just the act itself. It was what it meant. For as long as I could remember, my mother had been my constant. The quiet force that held everything together. Through every school morning, every late-night fever, every whispered reassurance that things would always be okay. She had been there, steady and sure. And now I didn't know who she was. The weight of it all settled deep into my bones, cold and unshakable. I reached the stairs and barely registered my own movement as I descended, my hands gripping the banister as if the world itself had lost its balance. The storm outside had only grown stronger, the wind rattling the windows, the rain beating against the glass in an unrelenting rhythm. I felt it in my chest, the way the storm mirrored the chaos inside me, the way everything had suddenly turned dark and wild. By the time I reached the front door, my breath had turned ragged. I needed air. I needed distance. I needed something, anything, to quiet the roaring in my head. The moment my hand met the doorknob, I heard it. Soft, hesitant footsteps behind me. A presence. I didn't turn. I couldn't. I knew it was her. Knew she had followed me. Knew she was standing there with the weight of guilt heavy on her shoulders. The air between us crackled with everything unspoken. The truth stretched out in the space between us, fragile and unbearable. She wanted to explain. I could feel it in the way she lingered, the way the silence stretched between us like a thread pulled too tight. But there were no words that could make this moment any less real. No explanation that could put my family back together, whole and unbroken. The only thing that mattered now was what came next, and I didn't know if I was ready to face it. Her gaze didn't waver, though I could see the way her throat tightened, the way her fingers curled slightly as if searching for something to hold on to. There was so much I wanted to say, but the words stayed trapped behind the knot in my chest. Nothing would change what had already happened. Nothing could take back what I had seen. She took a step closer, hesitant, like she was afraid I might pull away. I didn't move, though every muscle in my body felt caught between fight and flight. My breath was slow, measured, as if I could will myself into stillness. And then, before I could react, she leaned in. The warmth of her lips pressed gently against my cheek, light and familiar, yet somehow entirely different from every other time before. It wasn't the absent-minded affection of a mother seeing her son off to school. It wasn't the automatic gesture of comfort after a long day. It was something else, a plea, a silent, desperate attempt to bridge the widening gap between us. I felt it in the way her lips lingered for half a second too long, in the way her breath wavered against my skin as she pulled away. She was asking for something without saying a word, asking me not to leave, asking me not to hate her, asking me to see her as the same woman she had always been. But she wasn't. I stood there, my cheek still burning from the warmth of her kiss, my mind caught in the unbearable contradiction of it all. She loved me. That much was undeniable. But love didn't erase what had been done. It didn't erase the reality that now stood between us, thick and unmovable. The storm outside had settled into a steady rhythm, the wind less violent now, the rain more even. But inside me, nothing had settled. Her kiss had left something behind, something unspoken, something I wasn't sure how to carry. I met her gaze one last time, and in that moment, I saw it. The quiet, helpless understanding that whatever we had been before this night, we would never be again. Because some things, once broken, can't be put back together. And some things, once seen, can't be unseen. The warmth of her kiss lingered against my skin, but it did nothing to soften the ache spreading through my chest. If anything, it made it worse. It reminded me of all the times before. Every kiss goodnight. Every gentle touch when I was sick. Every moment when her love had been something I never once questioned. Now I questioned everything. She was still standing close, waiting for something. For me to speak. For me to reach back. For me to offer something, anything. To assure her that the foundation beneath us hadn't completely crumbled. But I had nothing to give. The weight of the moment pressed against me like a hand on my back, urging me forward, but I stayed frozen in place. I knew that if I opened my mouth, my voice would shake. And I didn't want her to hear that. I didn't want her to know that part of me still longed for the comfort she had always provided. That part of me wanted to fall into the familiarity of her embrace and pretend none of this had happened. But it had, and there was no going back. I took a slow step backward, my body instinctively pulling away from the warmth she was trying to offer. The shift was subtle, but I saw the way her shoulders dropped, the way the light in her eyes dimmed just slightly. She had expected it, but that didn't mean it didn't hurt. I turned before I could change my mind. The walls of the house, the same walls that had once felt like protection, now felt like a prison. The air was too thick, too heavy with something unspoken, something unbearable. The front door was still in front of me, the storm outside quieter now, calmer. The world had moved on while my own had shattered. I hesitated for just a second. Then, without looking back, I stepped out into the night. The cold air hit me immediately, sharp and bracing, cutting through the warmth that still clung to my skin from where she had kissed me. The wind smelled of rain and pavement, fresh and clean in a way that made my chest feel just a little lighter. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. The rain had eased into a soft drizzle, misting against my skin as I stepped onto the pavement. The night was still, the storm's earlier violence now reduced to a gentle hum, but inside me, nothing had settled. Everything still churned, raw and restless, like a wound left open to the air. I walked without direction, my steps slow at first, then faster as if moving could outrun the thoughts pressing against my skull. The neighborhood was quiet, only the occasional flicker of light behind closed windows reminding me that the rest of the world was unchanged. Unbothered. I wasn't sure how long I walked before I finally stopped beneath a street lamp, my breath uneven, my hands curled into fists at my sides. My mother's kiss still lingered on my cheek, the warmth of it conflicting with the ache in my chest. It was a familiar gesture, something that should have brought comfort, but instead it unsettled me. Because love and betrayal weren't supposed to exist in the same space. But they did. I had always believed love was something solid, unshakable. That no matter how the world shifted, some things, some people, would always remain unchanged. My mother had been one of those people. Now, she was something else. Not a stranger, but not the same either. I closed my eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply, trying to push down the emotions that threatened to rise again. But they didn't go away. The betrayal, the confusion, the grief for something I hadn't even realized I could lose, it all sat heavy inside me, refusing to be ignored. I knew I couldn't stay out here forever. The night would stretch on, the sky would lighten, and eventually, I would have to return to that house, to the place where everything had changed. But not yet. I wasn't ready to face what came next. So I stayed beneath the glow of a street lamp, the rain soft against my skin, caught between the past I had trusted and the future I no longer knew how to step into. The cold night air wasn't enough to clear my thoughts, but it was the only thing keeping me steady. My feet carried me without hesitation, as if my body knew what to do while my mind struggled to catch up. I needed to tell someone. Not tomorrow, not when the sun came up and reality felt like something distant and blurred. I needed to say it now, before the weight of it crushed me from the inside. My father was the only person who needed to hear it, the only person who mattered in this. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as I typed. The message was short, urgent. My heart pounded as I hit send, my breath visible in the cool air. I wasn't sure if he would answer, if he was even awake, but within moments, the screen lit up with a response. It was happening. I had set it into motion, and there was no going back. The minutes stretched unbearably as I waited at the meeting spot. A gas station a few blocks from home, lit only by flickering neon and the occasional passing car. The pavement beneath me was slick with rain, and the scent of gasoline and wet asphalt filled the air, grounding me in the present. Every second felt like an eternity, my pulse erratic, my mind replaying what I had seen over and over again, as if the details might somehow shift if I looked at them long enough. But they never did. Headlights cut through the darkness, and then he was there. My father. The sight of him, steady, familiar, sent a fresh wave of emotion crashing through me. But there was no time for hesitation, no room for careful words. I spilled everything the moment I reached him. Every detail. Every sickening truth. My voice was unsteady, my chest tight with something that wasn't quite panic but wasn't far from it either. I could feel his eyes on me, watching, searching, trying to process what I was saying. For a moment, the world around us disappeared, and all that remained was the sharp, undeniable reality between us. He didn't believe me. Not fully. Not yet. I saw it in the way his expression shifted, the way his brow furrowed, the flicker of something uncertain in his eyes. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him see that this wasn't a mistake, wasn't some misunderstanding. But I knew my father. He wouldn't accept this as truth until he saw it with his own eyes. We didn't speak as we got into the car. The drive home was suffocating, the silence between us thick with everything unsaid. I sat rigid in my seat, my nails digging into my palms, my throat tight with frustration. The rain had slowed, leaving behind streets that glistened under the dull glow of streetlights. The closer we got to the house, the heavier my body felt. Part of me wanted to turn back, to stop this before it could unravel any further, before I saw the look in his eyes when he realized it was real. But I had already made my choice. The moment the house came into view, I knew. The warmth in the windows, the stillness of the night, everything looked exactly as it had before. As if nothing had happened. As if the world hadn't cracked open just an hour ago. My heart pounded as my father parked the car, his hands tight on the wheel. The proof had to be inside. It had to be there, waiting, undeniable. But the moment we stepped through the door, I felt it. The absence. The change. The air inside was no longer thick with another presence. No music hummed softly through the walls, no murmur of voices, no scent of something unfamiliar lingering in the air. It was as if the house had swallowed every trace of what had happened, as if it had been scrubbed clean of the truth I had walked into just an hour before. I moved before my father, my feet carrying me through the hall, my breath shallow, my hands clammy. The door to my mother's bedroom was open now, the warm glow of a bedside lamp spilling softly into the hall. She sat there, perfectly composed, as if she had been waiting for us, as if she hadn't been tangled in another man's arms, wrapped in a moment she had no right to claim. Her face was unreadable, her posture relaxed, as if she had simply been reading before bed, as if the evening had been nothing but an ordinary night in our home. I felt sick. My father hesitated beside me, his expression shifting, doubt creeping into his features. He was looking for something, for any sign that what I had told him was true, for any detail that might betray her. But there was nothing. No second set of clothes discarded carelessly. No hurried signs of someone slipping out through the back door. No scent lingering in the air that didn't belong. The man was gone, vanished like he had never been there at all. And my mother, she wasn't shaken, wasn't scrambling for an excuse, wasn't trying to explain anything away. She didn't have to, because to my father, nothing had happened. I opened my mouth, but no words came. My mind raced, my pulse hammering as I searched for something, anything, that would prove I wasn't lying, that I hadn't imagined the warmth between them, the stolen moment that had burned itself into my memory like a scar. But my mother's eyes met mine, calm, steady. And in them, I saw something that made my stomach drop. She knew. She knew I had seen. She knew what I had done. Knew I had run straight into the night to tell the one person who could shatter whatever secret world she had built. And she wasn't afraid. Because she had won. Because she had erased the evidence before it could become real. Because the man had slipped away into the night, leaving nothing behind but the doubt in my father's mind. I turned to him, desperation clawing its way up my throat, but I already knew what I would find. His shoulders had relaxed just slightly, the tension in his jaw easing, the flicker of uncertainty turning into something else entirely. Hesitation, reluctance, and then, worst of all, skepticism. He didn't believe me. Not completely. Not anymore. My stomach twisted, a dull ache spreading through my ribs, pressing against my lungs until I felt like I couldn't breathe. I had thought telling him would make this real, that it would force the truth to the surface, undeniable and inescapable. But instead, the night had swallowed it whole, leaving behind nothing but my word against hers. And she had already won that battle. My mother stood slowly, smoothing out the fabric of her nightgown as if brushing away the last remnants of the night's chaos. Her face remained neutral, unreadable, but I saw it. The quiet assurance in the way she carried herself, the knowledge that she had control of this moment, that she would let my father come to his own conclusions, conclusions she knew would favor her. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drag him through every inch of the house, to make him see the ghosts of what had been here, to force him to feel the shift in the air, the warmth that still lingered from what she had tried to erase. But it wouldn't matter. He needed proof, and proof was the one thing she had made sure to take away. The silence stretched unbearably, the air in the room growing heavier by the second. My father exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face, and I saw the moment he decided to let it go. He wouldn't fight her. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. And just like that, the night became a lie. A secret only I carried. I clenched my jaw, my hands curling into fists, my heartbeat a steady roar in my ears. My mother's gaze flickered toward me one last time, something quiet and knowing resting behind her eyes. She wasn't ashamed. She wasn't afraid. She was untouchable. And I had never hated her more.